Capitalism, what makes the world go round and allows us to spend on some of the luxuries of life. President Obama is trying to rein in the worst excesses of free market capitalism with his reforms of Wall Street. But according to my guest on Hard Talk today, he's wasting his time. Professor David Harvey says capitalism is amoral and lawless and should be overthrown. Professor David Harvey, welcome to Hard Talk. Back in 2008, when you were watching banks collapsing in the autumn of that year, what were your thoughts?
My first thought was, what took them so long? That actually I'd been thinking that there was going to be a crash from around 2003 onwards. And given my views of how capitalism works, and I know it's always crisis-prone, I was just very surprised it hadn't happened earlier.
It was inevitable.
It was inevitable.
And did you feel some sort of glee, some sort of I told you so as you watched?
No, I didn't, because I know who gets hurt by these things. I mean, it's not as if the rich folk really get hurt. In fact, they've been making a lot of money out of this crisis. The people who get hurt are ordinary people, and I saw immediately that we were likely to see all of these people losing their homes, and almost certainly there was going to be unemployment following, so I was not happy about it at all, even though I reckoned it was going to come.
Now, you reckon it was going to come because you are a Marxist, would that be fair to say?
I'm a sort of a Marxist, I guess. I read Marx a lot. I actually, and I like what he says, and I use his theoretical insights to try to dissect how capitalism works.
And if you could boil it down to explain to somebody as a belief system what it is?
It's not a belief system. It's an understanding of how capitalism works. It's almost a scientific understanding of the nature of capitalism. There's a simple way in which you make money, which is you exploit labor in production in order to make more money. And if you make more money, you've then got the problem, what do you do with that more money? And there then arises what I call the capital surplus disposal problem. People have more money and they don't know what to do with it. So they have to then take it back and put money into making more money. And it's interesting, you look at how they've been doing that the last 30 years. Once upon a time they used to put their money into production. Over the last 30 years they've been putting it into buying assets and then actually leveraging their money into somebody else's money and then buying derivatives on derivatives of insurance on derivatives. So they've not been doing anything productive with it. They've actually been making money out of money. And this is why I thought to myself, this cannot continue. And this is why I was not at all surprised when there was a banking crisis.
And your argument is that that making of money is to the benefit of a very small few.
Yes, and you look who they are. I mean, and they're still doing it. I mean, just a few weeks ago, the leading hedge fund managers in New York received $3 billion each for their activities in the middle of a crisis.
When you look at where we are now, 18 months later,
yes,
with proposals for how to reform the system, President Obama trying to get his ideas through, are those things that will improve the current system in your view?
They might marginally do a bit of good here, a bit of good there. But I don't think they're going to do anything fundamental and address what I see as the fundamental problems. And it's interesting, the reforms are all about the financial sector, and people are saying we're coming out of the crisis because the stock market is going up. But what's happening to employment? What's happening to people's jobs?
Isn't that just something that lags but will catch up?
Well, that's what they always say, and they said that in 2000 when there was a crash, and of course nobody ever caught up. And in fact, nobody's been really catching up since the crisis of the 1970s. Wages have remained pretty stagnant.
But unemployment has improved.
Employment improved in the 1990s, yeah, that's true. But then we had a jobless recovery after 2000, and we're in another jobless recovery right now.
But when you look at what President Obama is proposing, he says, look, at what his ideas will mean an end to bailouts.
Yes.
Because basically banks will end up paying for the mistakes within the industry.
Right.
And he's talking about a consumer protection bill, laws that will protect the consumer.
Yes. Consumer protection is very, very important. The trouble is that, as I understand it, they're going to locate that inside of the Federal Reserve, which is a very bad idea. It's not going to be an independent agency. It should be a totally independent agency, not subject to the influence of the Federal Reserve. So that's the problem with that one. Bailing out the banks, yes, but actually I think the big problem there is you have all of those banks which are too big to fail, and therefore they're going to create this monetary basis for themselves. And they're going to actually collar all of the business, because in a sense they're going to have a secure future, knowing perfectly well that if they get into trouble they're going to be bailed out by their own funding to some degree. Small banks are not going to be bailed out at all. There's a competitive disadvantage between small banks and the big banks.
Okay, so however this plays out, he's trying to get his ideas through past the American lawmakers and not having much luck. But however, whatever conclusion they come to, how do you think it will play out? I think the party of Wall Street, as I call it, will win. And the party of Wall Street dominates Congress. And it dominates in the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party. So whatever comes out of this is going to come out in such a way that Wall Street may look as if it's suffering something, but actually is going to win. That is my prediction, okay? And if somebody wins, somebody loses? Yes, we lose. In what way? I think that what government policy has been about, actually since 1980s in the United States, has been always protecting the banks at the expense of the people. And they did that back in the 1970s, they did it in the 1980s, they did it in the savings and loan crisis of 1987 onwards. So again and again and again, they bail out the banks and we pay. But the argument for bailing out the banks is that it is helping the rest of it. It is ensuring that there are jobs, that there is money flowing through the system. But we've bailed the banks out. I don't see money sailing through the system right now. I mean, I just don't see it happening. The jobs are not materializing. What the banks are doing is actually building up their own assets, paying big bonuses, and not actually lending. So what will happen to employment? It's going to remain stagnant for some considerable time, I think. It may even get worse. But you don't think that at some stage it will improve? I think again, there may be some time. I mean, my guess is it's going to be a real attempt on the part of the Obama administration to improve the employment rate as you come into an election. You know, and you can manipulate all kinds of things to make it appear as if things are much better. And then after the election, and particularly Obama's re-election, you'll find yourself back in unemployment again. But aren't politicians re-elected on the basis of how people feel about them, and how they feel about them is whether they have jobs and their wealth? Yes, yes. Well, that's why you want to have employment rising just before you're in an election. And that's why you do everything you can. You prop up the economy to make sure, and that's why the Republicans are trying to stop it from happening. So there's a game played in Congress, which is about the political business cycle, not about, you know, what's really necessary for the economy to revive. So whatever can happen, so long as it is and remains a capitalist system in any form, you think ultimately it will continue to fail? I think, no, fail is the wrong word. Stagger